Okay, well, hello everyone. On behalf of ASSP Long Island chapter, I wanted to thank you all for coming to today's virtual technical meeting for the month of February. We have joining us today 3 representatives from the Central Pine Barrens Commission, who will be presenting on a few of the group's programs and initiatives for the protection of the Long Island Pine Barrens, specifically as it relates to wildfire safety. Very quickly before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to cover our upcoming events for the chapter. We will not be planning a meeting for the month of March. However, in April, we will be hosting our annual professional development conference. This will be held on Wednesday, April 27th. It'll be an all-day event from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., which will be exclusively streamed live through Zoom. So this will be a virtual event. ASSP members will receive discounted registration, and the registration fee will be waived entirely for students. And the conference will include a variety of topics ranging from Legionella testing to sustainability in the hospital setting. We'll also feature a representative from ASSP National to address the group, as well as the OSHA Long Island Area Office Director, Kevin Sullivan. So stay tuned for updates for this event. We'll be opening up registration hopefully by the end of this month, so you can keep up to date on our website, li.assp.org, and our LinkedIn page, which you can find by searching ASSP Long Island Chapter. And our members also receive our email distribution. So I don't want to take up any more time. I'm going to hand it over to our speakers. So please join me in welcoming Judy Jacobson, Executive Director for the Central Pine Barrens Commission, Sabrina Cohn, Ecological Field Specialist, and Polly Wiegand, Science and Stewardship Manager.
Okay. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Judy Jacobson, and I'm the Executive Director for the Central Pine Barrens Joint Planning and Policy Commission. I want to thank you all for inviting us to speak today. Our presentation is titled Igniting Change for Safer Communities, since it will provide some important information on how community members and homeowners can take ownership of better protecting themselves and their property from wildfire with simple measures that primarily involve good property maintenance. The presentation, my thing didn't change here, 1 second. The presentation also includes a little background on the Central Pine Barrens area, how it was created, and the commission that oversees this area on a regional scale. It also will cover focusing on the commission in terms of doing what in the community outreach that it is performing related to wildfire prevention. And I'll have a brief overview of the commission's prescribed fire program that will help protect communities and improve forest health. And as mentioned by Matt earlier, joining me today in order of appearance is Sabrina Cohn, who is an ecological field specialist with the Central Pine Barrens Commission, who has also been very involved in the community outreach initiatives related to wildfire prevention, and that she will be talking about today. Also with us is Polly Wiegand, who is the Commission's Science and Stewardship Manager. Aside from her many responsibilities for stewardship for the Commission, will also be going over the Commission's, providing an overview of the Commission's prescribed fire management program. So I just want to start with a little overview of the Commission and some background on the Central Pine Barrens area. The Commission was created in 1993 by the New York State Legislature, who passed the Long Island Pine Barrens Protection Act. And what this did was protect the largest remaining natural area on Long Island, which is approximately 106,000 acres. And as you could see in the map, it created 2 distinct areas. The darker green is the core preservation area, which after 1993, no new development can occur. And the lighter green is the compatible growth area, where new development after 1993 has to conform to certain development standards. A lot of that relates to clearing allowances, fertilizer-dependent vegetation, and things along that line. So the Pine Barrens Act also created a 5-member commission, and you can see who's represented on the commission is the governor's rep, the county executive, and also the 3 town supervisors, Brookhaven, Southampton, and Riverhead, that are a part of the Pine Barrens area. The commission is a state entity, but it operates similar to a planning board and a park commission. The mission of the commission is primarily to protect the groundwater resources and the ecology, the unique ecology of the Central Pine Barrens area that is home to a vast number of rare, endangered, and special species of concern. So what's interesting about the Pine Barrens is that it is a it has fire-adapted ecosystems, which means fire plays an important role in the life cycle of these ecosystems in order to regenerate and stay healthy. There's some examples of some of our fire-adapted ecosystems in the Pine Barrens. Fire plays a very important role in terms of replenishing soil nutrients, removing built-up vegetation, and it helps create conditions for healthy regrowth. A lot of the vegetation in the Pine Barrens will have adaptations that help protect it during a wildfire. For instance, the circle on the right, sort of in the center, is a pitch pine that has very thick bark plates. And you can see little sprouts of new growth from these, they call them epicormic buds. And when a fire goes through, the pitch pine is actually able to regrow from these buds. So there's also some basal growth as well. The pine cones, in particular for the pitch pine, also will open and release when exposed to fire, which will also enable it to resprout and grow new pitch pine trees. So why should we be concerned about wildfire on Long Island? What's interesting in Suffolk County, we have approximately 800 brush fires that occur each year. And this is information from Suffolk County Fire Rescue and Emergency Services. Now, given the right, a lot of these are brought under control readily. However, they're given the right conditions, high winds, very droughty period of time, a brush fire could easily become a wildfire that is more difficult to control. We actually have 2 brush fire seasons. We have a spring starting in March, and then a later season that starts around July and ends sort of the end of September. Most of the causes of brush fires are human origin, either accidental or arson, and they're rarely occur from lightning, because usually in our area, lightning is accompanied by rain. So what is the problem? The years of fire suppression to protect structures and the public has caused an increase in buildup of dead vegetation in the natural areas and creating very high levels of vegetation buildup that creates a potentially hazardous wildfire condition should an ignition occur. And what you see are the pictures on the right are actually photos from the 1995 Rocky Point and Sunrise wildfires that occurred in August. It was a very dry, droughty, extended period of time. And there were actually two ignitions that occurred, one in Rocky Point, Pine Barrens State Forest, and the second ignition was near the Suffolk Community College in Riverhead. And it had a dramatic impact in that it burned approximately 7,000 acres. There are around 400 people that had to evacuate their homes. And it also occurred at the height of tourism season for the eastern end of Long Island. So impacts from wildfire, as mentioned, based when I was talking about Rocky Point and Sunrise, large economic impact. The Rocky Point fires had an impact on the tourism season on the East End. It had affected businesses and displaced homeowners. It also has impact to natural resources, loss of habitat, flora and fauna. In some areas, the fire was very hot, which made it difficult for some of that vegetation to come back. And what you see on the right is the Crescent Bow wildfire that occurred in 2012 in the Ridge and Manorville area, where there was 1,200 acres burned. Again, there were evacuations that occurred, road closures. There was a lot of property damage that occurred, homes lost during that time. So in terms of why this is an increasing problem that we are continuing to deal with, and the Commission has developed certain responses, in particular after these two larger fires, is because of the increasing development in these natural areas or adjacent to these natural areas, this is called the wildland urban interface, which you can see in this picture in particular, the amount of natural areas that surround quite a lot of homes in this area. And this puts these communities at a greater risk to loss of and damage to homes and properties from wildfire. So the Commission, in its response after the 95 wildfires, actually created a wildfire task force to create a plan to start pre-fire planning for wildfire suppression response. And out of that plan came a number of recommendations, such as purchasing a fire weather station in order to put out a daily fire danger report. Now, the staff at the Commission actually takes the data from this fire weather station and compiles this daily fire danger report that is provided to Suffolk County Fire Rescue and Emergency Services during the fire season. And it's a regional scale fire danger rating, and it's low, moderate, high, very high, and extreme, which means the difficulty it is to control a fire should an ignition occur. The plan also spoke about the need for providing additional training to local volunteer firefighters, more in terms of dealing with the difference in fighting a wildfire versus structural fires. And also later on, as part of the fire management plan, also called for a prescribed fire plan to be created. And that was finally created in 2021, which was quite an accomplishment that to develop this plan for the Central Pine Barrens area focusing on the public lands in the Central Pine Barrens. After 2012 Crescent Bow wildfire, the commission was able to obtain grant funding to create a community wildfire protection plan. And a specific issue related to the Crescent Bow wildfire was the availability in part of the closer to the Manorville area. There was homes that were not on public water and therefore not fire hydrants available. So what happened was the Suffolk County Health Department stepped up and actually installed fire wells in this location to provide assistance for future firefighting in that area. So as I mentioned before, the commission actually received grant funding to prepare a community wildfire protection plan. This is primarily the area that was impacted by the Crescent Bow wildfire. The community wildfire protection plan, you can see on the left, is a risk assessment map that overlays different factors of importance, vegetation being one of them, other important resources that perhaps need to be protected, whether it's historic, cultural, and infrastructure. And all these factors get overlaid onto a map that helps identify your areas of greater risk to wildfire. And that helps in terms of future planning for wildfire protection and wildfire prevention initiatives. That also, out of the plan came various strategies and recommendations. Among them was importance of public outreach, such as doing individual home assessments, which Sabrina will be talking about today. We have been offering workshops to folks that live in this community. Also important component of strategies and recommendations from this plan related to wildfire mitigation measures, using prescribed fire as a tool to reduce fuel loads in certain areas within this CWPP, and also mechanical treatments, among other things. So you probably have seen in the wildfire photos from the west, where you see these homes out in California and various areas, where you'll see a couple of homes that are completely fine, and every other home around them is completely burned to the ground. And they're not actually miracle homes. There's a reason why they were able to survive the wildfire. And the U.S. Forest Service did a lot of research, post-fire investigations, and using fire science, examined why certain homes were able to survive pretty unscathed, while other homes were completely destroyed around them. So based on fire science and research by the U.S. Forest Service, it was found that a crown fire, which is a fire at the top of the trees, would have to be less than 100 feet from a structure to ignite a wood wall. And then they found that also at 33 feet away, only a few ignitions occurred. And this number is very important because they created a whole program focusing on what they found out through this research and the importance of homeowners being able to protect their home up to 30 feet away from the structure. And this led to the creation of the FireWise program, by the U.S. Forest Service and the National Fire Protection Association. And through that program, which is through largely on the nfpa.org website, but it's also firewise.org, there are key principles that homeowners can implement that will help their home and property better survive a wildfire. And Sabrina will be touching on these factors as well. They also found that that embers from a fire can travel up to 2 to 5 miles from a fire front and ignite combustible materials on a property, and that they found that this was the most common reason for loss or damage to a structure. So as I mentioned before, this whole Firewise program that was created led to the development of a home ignition zone approach to protect structures from wildfire, concentrating initially around 30 feet around your home and creating this defensible space in order to help your home to survive. And that is what Sabrina is going to be covering at this point. So I'm going to turn this over now to Sabrina.
Hi all, thank you Judy for providing the great background on the commission and my portion of the presentation as well. So this slide just shows the topics that I'll cover, like Judy mentioned, which I will discuss the common ways that homes tend to ignite, and then cover the concept of defensible space and the 3 home ignition zones, as well as home construction and landscaping and how you can maintain your property to prevent ignition. And then lastly, I'll just talk about the home assessments that I've been conducting. Thanks, Judy. So Judy will be clicking through my slides. If there's any, hiccups in that, I'll do my best to direct her to move on. So here you can see the 3 ignition sources. Like Judy mentioned, the first would be ember attacks. These embers can travel, over 2 miles to your home, and they can ignite any kind of fuel that might be available. So this is the most common kind of ignition for homes. Some people, normally may imagine just a flaming front coming towards the home. So that might look like a surface fire along the ground. That tends to burn through light fuels such as grass or leaf litter. And then the third is a crown fire, which tends to be the most hard to control wildfire. But as long as you don't have any trees within that 30-foot zone, your house should be safe from that. So then this is covering the concept of defensible space. Like Judy mentioned, that photo on the top right is actually from the Crescent Bow fire that happened in 2012. And these homes are great examples of how the use of that defensible space concept can really be effective. So the way that the National Fire Protection Agency breaks it down is into 3 zones. The first being the immediate zone, which is the first 5 feet from your home and including the structure of the home as well. The second is the intermediate zone, being from 5 to 30 feet from the home. And then there's the extended zone, which is 30 feet and beyond. So starting with the immediate zone, which is that area outlined in red on the image on the right. This is most vulnerable to embers because they can tend to blow in and then hit up against the house or the structure and accumulate. And then, so the main focus for this area is really to have almost no vegetation. You really want to kind of have as many hard surfaces like pavement or stone paths as possible. And you want to use non-combustible landscaping. If you do put in plants, you want to have less ignitable plants. I'll talk about that later on. And then you want to also avoid storing things like firewood or propane during fire season in this zone. And then you want to look into what we call hardening the home, which is different types of maintenance and mitigation measures you can take, which I'll also cover later on. There you go. And then moving on to the next slide. So this is the intermediate zone outlined in orange. The focus for this area is to create breaks in fuel. So fuel is anything that can burn, being like plants or woody material. You kind of want to break that up and not have too much continuity, which is how the fire can continue to travel and move. You want to keep your lawn well watered and mowed down, so there's no dead material. Grass, dried up grass is, very light fuel, can ignite very easily. And you want to remove ladder fuels, which are, if you think like of space vertically, plants that grow kind of low to the ground and then work their way up to shrub size. If those are nearby, say a pine tree, they could end up carrying the fire up into the crown and make it a lot more dangerous for you. And then the general recommendation for tree spacing in this zone is anything greater than 18 feet between the crowns of the trees. And again, like I said, you want to break up the continuity of vegetation. So the next zone, the last zone is the extended zone. So as Judy mentioned, typically beyond 30 feet is not as large of a concern. It doesn't tend to cause ignition of the home, but you still want to be aware of removing any leaf litter or debris off the ground to prevent the fire from traveling, as well as any dead plant material. You want to, if you do have any outbuildings or sheds in this zone and you want to protect them, you'd want to be sure to remove any vegetation that is growing adjacent or any overhanging branches. And then the general recommendation for tree spacing is between 30 and 60 feet. You want to have at least 12 feet between canopy tops. And then beyond 60 feet, you want to have at least 6 feet beyond canopy tops, between canopy tops. So next I'll talk about hardening the home. I'll cover different features of the home, including the roof and chimney, the eaves, soffits and gutters, windows and vents, siding, decks and porches, garage, and also fencing. So starting with the roof and chimney, when I go and do the home assessments, I typically assess the material of the roof. So an example of a combustible roof material would be wood shake, and any other non-combustible materials, you can look them up as like Class A fire rated. That's how we generally make recommendations for what would be an appropriate material. It tends to be metal, concrete, or asphalt, as well as, in the top right corner, you can see concrete or clay tile would suffice. And then generally what I look for also is that you want to look for gaps or missing shingles where embers could potentially enter. Oftentimes underneath the roof material, there could be wood. So you want to make sure to protect that from ignition. And then also if any leaf litter or woody debris accumulate on the roof, you want to remove those promptly, especially during fire season. And then so other considerations is if you have any skylights or solar panels, those tend to be places where leaf litter will accumulate. So you want to check those periodically and make sure there's no debris accumulating underneath them or around them. And also sometimes people, when they have skylights, they can be an acrylic dome, which is a combustible material. So you want to switch that over to glass if possible. Again, I mentioned leaf and woody debris, and also if you have any trees growing nearby the home, you want to make sure that there's no overhanging branches and trim those back. And then in terms of the chimney, I'll briefly touch on that you want to make sure you have a spark arrestor and chimney cap with screening. That's another place where embers could enter the home. So moving on to eaves, soffits, and gutters. So on the bottom right corner, you can see the photo of what is an example of an exposed eave with the wooden rafter showing through. So that's not exactly an ideal situation. The top right is much more of an appropriate Firewise example. So again, looking at materials, you want to avoid vinyl and wood and move towards aluminum if possible. I usually take a look at the soffits and make sure that those vent openings you can see on the top right on the under surface of the soffit that there's vent openings. You want to make sure that those are less than 1/8 of an inch because embers, can't tend to enter at that size. Again, the exposed rafters, and also something that people may not think about is having gutter guards. That's a place where leaf litter and woody debris can accumulate. And even with gutter guards, things still tend to accumulate on top. So you want to be sure to be cleaning out that periodically as well. And again, just looking at the condition of the eaves, you want to make sure there's no gaps or holes in the soffit and removing any kind of debris. So moving on to windows and vents. So what materials we usually look for are ideal is a tempered glass with a double pane. If the radiant heat gets too close or the flames, they can tend to crack the windows. So you also want to make sure you have screens that in the event that the window does break, that you still have the screen there, preventing ember entry. And then for the trim, sometimes I see wood trim. You want to maybe switch over to aluminum, which is a non-combustible. And again, I always look at the condition. So any cracks or holes in the screens or glass. You want to look at vegetation that's less, you want to make sure it's less than 3 feet from the window, or sorry, more than 3 feet from the window. Again, if those plants were to ignite, they would end up cracking the window and allowing flames to enter the home. And again, if looking at the window screens, you want to make sure that their openings are less than 1/8 of an inch. So looking at siding, again, the most common combustible materials that I tend to see are vinyl and wood, vinyl being a very affordable choice, but it doesn't tend to actually catch flame, but it can melt off the side of the house and again, expose the wood underneath that could ignite. So it's not really ideal. The most ideal materials would be brick, fiber cement board, stucco, aluminum, things like that. But even if you do have like a wood siding, there are fire retardant treatments that you could spray onto and treat the wood to make it more fire resistant. And again, I always look at condition, so holes and gaps where embers could enter. At the very least, if you do have wood, you can paint it on the surface. That could help it be more fire resistant. And make sure if the paint does start to crack to then also repaint it. So we can move on to the next slide. Okay, yeah, no worries. So decks and porches. So what underneath the decks is actually like a really big concern for ember accumulation. Decks often are made of wood, so we want to make sure we're really being conscious of not allowing embers to accumulate. And a better option, I know metal is not really a great option for the deck surface, but at least the railings and the stairs could be. And then the biggest concern is embers accumulating underneath. So we want to make sure that there's lattice skirting underneath. You can see in the top right picture is a great example of a Firewise home. And behind that lattice, it's recommended to put screening, again, less than 1/8 of an inch openings, preferably metal. And again, if there's any flammable furniture or cushions or rugs or propane tanks that you store on the deck, you want to remove those during fire season because those could tend to ignite first and then lead to ignition of the deck or home. And then, decks can be a place where leaves and woody debris tend to accumulate as well. So you want to make sure you're keeping them nice and clean. You can kind of see on the bottom right picture some leaf litter accumulating next to the deck. This particular one is not a raised deck, so underneath is not so much of a concern, but even leaves accumulating up next to can be a concern. So yeah, so basically same kind of recommendations as everything else. So moving on. Lastly is the garage. So also the trim can tend to commonly be wood. You want to switch that over to aluminum if possible. Also underneath the gap between the door and the ground could be a place for ember entry. So we want to make sure that's well sealed. Garages that have windows, again, same with the other windows, you want to preferably have them be tempered glass. And if they are already damaged or have holes, you want to replace them. And inside the garage, if you store any flammable materials or propane or anything like that, you want to remove that during fire season. Again, on the bottom right corner is a great example of leaf litter accumulation next to the garage, which you want to remove before fire season. Okay, and then there's fencing. Common combustible materials that I see are wood and vinyl. Non-combustible option is metal. And then a big thing is that wood fences especially can act as almost a fuse that leads up to the house. So if your fence connects to a wooded area behind the home and leads up to the home and connects to the side of the house, that could carry the fire right to the house. So you want to, at the very least, install a metal barrier, like metal flashing, between where the fence connects to the house. If not, replace the section that connects with a metal gate or metal section of the fence. And another thing that I often see is overhanging vegetation or vegetation growing up near the fence. You want to trim that back at least 3 feet to make sure that in the event of a wildfire, that's not likely going to ignite. So lastly, I'm going to talk about landscape vegetation in this section as far as property maintenance. So some examples of fire resistant plants, you want to look at hardwood trees like oaks, tend to be less flammable than, say, conifers. Conifers include pine trees, the arborvitae you see in the top left, any spruces or firs. Another very flammable plant is ivy. So, sorry, not ivy, holly, which you see in the bottom left. And the last photo is a photo of a sedum plant, which is a relatively fire resistant. Oh, we can still go back to that slide, sorry. Some characteristics of the fire resistant plants tend to be that they're high moisture and they don't accumulate dead vegetation. The highly flammable plants tend to have oils and resins or wax in them that is highly flammable, and they tend to retain dead material. So that's that for that slide. So the last thing I'm going to cover is additional ways to prepare for wildfire. So, these are just considerations besides the maintenance of your home that you can do so that, you can jump into action in the event of a wildfire. So the first one is making sure your home has good emergency responder access, which is just generally a good thing to do. So often, driveways maybe aren't really wide enough for an engine to pull in. You want to make sure, you're trimming back vegetation. I've seen narrow driveways with vegetation growing on both sides so that if a fire engine wanted to come through, it would be pretty difficult. And you also want to make sure your house number is really visible. We recommend putting a house number not only on your mailbox, but also on the front of the house, and that it be more than 3 inches tall so that it's very visible. It's a great idea to have an emergency action plan, including an evacuation checklist of belongings you may want to bring, as well as a prepared emergency bag in the event of a wildfire. It's also good to be aware of your water supply. So, if you have spigots, garden spigots and hoses, you want to make sure you have enough hose to reach your whole property. Often when a wildfire is occurring, people leave their sprinkler systems on in order to protect the home. And it's also a very good idea to make sure your insurance is up to date and take an inventory of all your belongings in the event of loss of property, that you would be able to make an insurance claim for your belongings. And these are just 2 kind of taglines that we generally promote for you to kind of stay in this headspace of fire-wise. So the first is be lean, clean and green, which refers to your landscaping. So keeping everything neat and tidy and well watered. And then think like an ember. I'm sure you noticed it was pretty repetitive with the things that the considerations to make and the mitigation measures is really just trying to limit the accumulation of embers entering the home. So here is my last slide. This is just kind of some information on the home assessments that Judy and I have been conducting. So on the right, you can see the same CWPP area map that Judy outlined. Right now, we're only offering home assessments within this area. It mainly covers the Ridge community, but also parts of Manorville and Calverton. And this is on the left is our postcard that we sent out. If you do live in this area, you may have received it in the mail. And the phone number and email provided would contact me. If you send me an email, or feel free to give me a call if you live in this area, and I would be happy to assess your home. And then another very important note with this is, as part of the Forest Service grant, we can also offer reimbursement if homeowners decide to implement any of the mitigation projects that I proposed in the report, that we can reimburse you up to $5,000. But those projects and work on the home need to be pre-approved by us before they can be completed, and then we can reimburse you once the work is complete. So please don't hesitate to contact me if you're interested. And then here, if you wanted to click on these later on, I think that Matt will be providing a PDF of our presentation. So you can click on these links. They will take you to the National Fire Protection Association. There's a lot of really good information on there, and as well as the Ready, Set, Go program, which will provide great guidance for how you can prepare. And then if we have time at the end, I'll play this video, but it looks like we're kind of short on time, so we'll skip it for now. So going over to Polly now, she's going to talk about the Central Pine Barrens Prescribed Fire Program.
Thanks, Sabrina. And very quickly, Polly, if I can interrupt, we did have a Q&A session at the end, but I saw a hand up. So if we wanted to just open it up real quick, if anyone had any questions on any of the slides that were presented so far.
Sure.
We can continue.
Yeah, looks like Leo has a question.
Does it need to be unmuted?
We could save it for the end. We can
save it for the end. Okay.
Thanks.
All right. So thank you for having us, Matthew. It's greatly appreciated. So my role in the Science and Stewardship Program is to help facilitate stewardship in science and research in the Pine Barrens. And one of the leading ways that we are conducting this is through implementing a prescribed fire program through contractual agreement with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And so one of the first questions that people have for us is, why are we implementing a prescribed fire program? And really, this is related back to the topics that Judy and Sabrina both covered very extensively, is that the Central Pine Barrens is a fire-dependent ecosystem. And due to the long-term fire suppression of wildfires, we have an increase in fuel buildup. And we also have an ecosystem that depends, its vigor and its health depends on fire. So we use prescribed fire to effectively fight fire with fire to reduce that wildfire risk and help improve those ecological benefits. You can forward, Judy.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead, keep clicking. So, and this is a well demonstrated management practice that's, been used for, well, tens of thousands of years, starting with the Native Americans who used prescribed fire to improve their hunting grounds and home areas and to release those nutrients that Judy had identified to help the vegetation be more vigorous and increase their fruiting and capacity for food resources. To the more relevant and recent use of prescribed fire in a prescribed and controlled manner is exemplified within our land use plan, as well as our fire management plan that Judy identified through the Wildfire Task Force following the 95 fires. There's a whole chapter within that that identifies the need for a prescribed fire management plan within the Pine Barrens. And then we've built upon that it's very common practice within prescribed fire management plans across the country to have a prescribed fire management plan. And we've developed one that was published in 2021 for the Central Pine Barrens. And this provides the overall management plan and how we're going to implement and develop our prescribed fire management program. Next slide, please. So further illustrating the occurrence of wildfire on the landscape that Judy had identified, this map shows the 10 largest wildfires from 1930 through 2021. And you can see that they are very sizable wildfires and they occurred across each decade in large scale in different areas. And that informs our fire return interval for helping to identify how frequently we would use prescribed fire management on the landscape to treat these ecosystems where fire suppression is occurring. It also helps give an idea of how frequently these large wildfires occur on the landscape. You can see on the graph on the right-hand side of really the alarming trend that we see related to wildfire suppression and the development of wildfires, that suppression is very evident, and we're not having these large-scale wildfire occurrences because of the increase in urbanization and the response of the fire departments to protect public safety, which we recognize is highly important in the leading need for this wildfire suppression. But there are greater implications within the Pine Barrens related to that wildfire suppression, as it is interrupting the fire history and the benefits that's provided through that. It also is increasing the fuels that are accumulating and increasing the higher risk of intense wildfires with the increased fuels that are occurring. The benefit is it demonstrates the need for prescribed fire. And one of the assets with prescribed fire is that we can implement that wildfire need and the benefits of wildfire through a prescription in a controlled and prescribed manner, so that we meet the goals of protecting the public and also meeting our ecological goals, because we are putting fire on the ground in a time frame in a controlled manner where we're limiting the exposure of the public to smoke and still protecting public safety through limited exposure to direct fire and homes to direct fire, but still meeting those goals of the program. You can move on to the next slide, please. So our goals, as I've illustrated, to improve public safety, and Judy, as I'm going through this, if you could just continue to click on the right-hand side, you'll see the concern that we have in the driving force with prioritization of public safety. So these are aerials of showing the land use change over time in south of Currens and Rocky Point, Pine Barren State Forage and Ridge and Manorville. You can see in 1978, 1980, the development of the landscape where the encroachment into the urban interface occurred into the Pine Barrens. And then you can see the wildfires that occurred in this area post-development. So this area has a very high wildfire risk. The red are the fire management units that we've put in the burn blocks where we'll be conducting prescribed fire this season to help reduce the wildfire risk. And these units, their benefit is not only reducing the fuels within this unit, but it also provides that intermediary space where when a wildfire develops, because wildfire is inevitable, it's just a matter of when, these thinned out, burned and treated units having lower canopy density and understory fuel will bring the fire out of the canopy into the ground where the fire departments can readily respond and protect the infrastructure that adjoins adjacent to these units. Next slide, please. In addition, we recognize that the fire departments in wildfire occurrences are the first responders and the incident commanders on these burns. And some of the tactics that they've previously employed have exposed them through their direct attack to wildfire. So by implementing this prescribed fire program, we're able to allow them the ability to change their tactics in addressing these outbreaks of wildfire that then helps protect the firefighters themselves and their safety, reducing risks to homeowners and properties, as well as the fire department's property and equipment losses as well. And we also are working to reduce the hazards that develop under a wildfire with standing trees and snags, where we can more readily address those issues in a managed unit than post-wildfire. Those wildfire scenarios also provide a high risk where we're going in and managing post-wildfire to our own firefighters. So it's not just those structural firefighters that are responding, but our own prescribed fire crews as well that we're looking out for their safety. Next slide, please. And then the third leading goal for this fire program, as I've alluded to, is improving the ecosystem health. And when you reduce fire in a fire-dependent and disturbance-dependent ecosystem as the Pine Barrens, what we see is we don't have those driving factors that reduce the organic matter to maintain that xeric or very dry soil climate. It also doesn't reduce the dead and dying trees or the tree density. So you have a highly overstocked ecosystem that all those individuals are competing for the resources. So they're not maximizing the vigor or their health, and that increases the susceptibility to disease and pests. And so the southern pine beetle outbreaks that occurred in 2014 for the first time really illustrated and brought to our attention as land managers and the public as well as to the degraded forest health because of the lack of fire disturbance and other management practices to help maintain the high ecosystem health. So we're looking to the future of implementing prescribed fire to meet all of those different end goals that are illustrated here. And predominantly, pitch pines are a fire-dependent species. So by implementing prescribed fire, we're looking to mitigate the effects of southern pine beetle, increase the resilience of pitch pines, and help keep the pine in the pine barrens in which it is named. Next slide, please. So our overall fire program, I'm going to go through the different steps that we have created and have implemented in order to get fire on the ground. So the first, we secured the funding, ever so important, because prescribed fire is extremely expensive to implement. But it is more cost effective to implement prescribed fire than it is to conduct mechanical treatment. So while the initial investment to create the program is high, the long-term benefits and implementation costs are much lower. We've prioritized across the 105,000 acres of the Central Pine Barrens by a landscape scale, and also dividing into units so they're more manageable and focused, and utilizing our resources, which are limited, to cover those areas in high prioritization, using areas that already have management plans, the CWPP that Judy well illustrated, looking at where previous forest management has occurred that we could build on, as well as recent wildfire. And then incorporated into that where the areas of high WUI protection, which is the urban infrastructure that is occurring within the wildland areas. And then we also take into consideration rare and unique ecosystems that are highly fire dependent. Once we have those areas prioritized, as you can see on our map here, we've started planning in green for those areas and developing burn plans that meet the state rules and regulations for prescribed fire. And then also conducting the environmental review and the permitting that's necessary to put fire on the ground. In that capacity, many of these units haven't had pre-treatments that are necessary to reduce the wildfire risk due to increased fuel loading. So many of the units require pre-vegetation treatment and also other fire infrastructure like fire lanes and treatment areas and the such. Next slide, please. So then the next we've moved to is our staffing. So we've worked very diligently to bolster our qualifications on our staff. Our staff has already qualified and has experience in prescribed fire, and we've moved to hire a seasonal squad, including a squad boss and additional crew, all of which are qualified and trained to implement prescribed fire. And that's headed up by a burn boss. We have Bob Panko, who's our burn boss and fire management specialist on all of our burns. We work cooperatively with the DEC, and they have a great volunteer program across the island. If you're interested in participating in prescribed fire, there is a Wildfire Academy that's coming up with a limited cost. I think it's about $400. You can become a qualified trained volunteer, and you can come out and volunteer on our prescribed fires. If you're interested on that, please let me know, and I can get you in touch with the training program for that. We also have secured our insurance and also the equipment to implement prescribed fire. Can you go back one slide, please? And all of that comes together to allow us to implement prescribed fire. Most notable, we have just recently purchased these 2 UTV units that are type 7 engines. They have a 100-gallon tank, and they'll allow us to have more increased accessibility within these forested units, where the larger fire engines that we use in grassland units don't have the accessibility. We've also implemented an extension education and outreach campaign, especially since folks are not used to prescribed fire or fire within their natural landscapes. And so it makes people nervous. And we are looking to this education outreach campaign to help inform the public of the activities that we're doing, so that it gives them a sense of comfort and peace, knowing that there's prescribed fire operations out there that are helping mitigate wildfire and protect their home and safety. This is an adaptive prescribed fire program, so we are conducting vegetation monitoring to make sure that we're meeting our ecological and wildfire reduction goals. Next slide. So our burn seasons, as Judy highlighted, occur from spring, March through May, and then fall, August to October. And then we do have periodic operations in the winter as well, but we are restricted in June and July because of the federally threatened northern long-eared bat. That's its pupping season, and so they're not able to easily fly during this time period. So we restrict operations to help ensure the occurrence of new generations and their successful reproductive stages. Next slide. So moving forward, Judy, if you want to click through as I go through this, we are continuing this spring with conducting prescribed fire in our Rocky Point demonstration forest just off Whiskey Road. So there's 9 acres. We'll be conducting prescribed fires with DEC there. And then moving just south of that, we're continuing to burn here in our South of Kearns woodland units. So there's upwards of 123 acres that we may treat this year, but we don't expect to treat all of them. It'll be dependent on the weather. And then we will be moving into assisting Brookhaven National Lab with the treatment of some of their burn units that's just north and east of the Rick Ring. And then moving into Sarnoff State Forest over in Southampton to help treat the western side of Sarnoff State Forest as well. So we're well prepped for this prescribed fire implementation with all those components. And we're very excited to have built this program and get this program off the ground this year. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in learning more about our prescribed fire program or the Central Pine Barrens Commission as a whole, please visit our website. We have our general information as well as wildfire prevention that Judy and Sabrina highlighted, our prescribed fire program, and then the training operation through the New York Incident Management and Wildfire Academy. We have a mailing list, which we invite you to join if you would like to keep abreast of our educational opportunities or our prescribed fire activities. You can sign up through the website, and you can select what fire management unit you live in if you'd like to get updates on operations. If you're interested in becoming a general volunteer or a prescribed fire volunteer, you can click on that link as well. And then you can also stay up to date on by joining our Facebook platforms. We have a number of different platforms. We have a Commission General, a Calverton Manorville CWPP if you live in that area, as well as a prescribed fire page, and then the training, the NIWEMA page as well. And we also have Instagram. So feel free to like those pages. And the last slide I have is our contacts. So this is the way that you can get in touch with any of us. We welcome questions at this point and open it up in that regard. So thank you for your time and listening to our presentations. And we hope that you find value in this information.
All right, great. Thank you, Judy, Sabrina, and Polly. Thanks for taking the time to present to us today. We put these virtual meetings together for our safety professionals for the occupational field and the environmental safety field. But I think it's just as important, just as Long Islanders, to know, to get a better understanding of the natural environment and what groups are doing to protect these natural resources. So we appreciate you calling in today. And yeah, as you said, we can open it up. We're just a few minutes over, but if anyone had any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or unmute real quick. I did have one that was sent to me in a direct message. How long does it take for an area to recover from a large fire event?
So it depends on the season in which the fire occurred, but this is a fire dependent system. So it thrives on capturing those nutrients that are readily released from the vegetation. It's also very sandy soil. So the vegetation grasps onto those nutrients and builds and utilizes those nutrients very rapidly. So you'll see green up past post-fire within a month. It's amazing to see the rejuvenation and the resilience of this system to prescribe fire.
Okay, thank you. I had a question, and you touched on it for a minute on the general public opinion for the prescribed fire program. So is there a lot of pushback typically? Is it tough to try and educate people, or do most people understand the benefits on doing these?
I think that people understand the benefits. It's the opportunity to reach and share that information. So we find that to be one of the most important aspects of our fire program is the education and outreach to proactively reach the public so that they're aware that the operations are occurring and why we are implementing prescribed fire. We're trying to, as much as possible, eliminate the surprise prescribed fire. So we do have a requirement that anyone adjacent to the prescribed fire receive a notification in advance of the burns, but we're taking that program even a step further to, build on opportunities like this presentation to get the word out about our prescribed fire program. We have tabling events that we've attended, like the National Night Out in Ridge. We reach out proactively to the fire department and the civic associations and the council representatives for each of the town, and provide those notifications proactively in advance to let everyone know that the fire season is upon us for prescribed fire, as well as the wildfire risk signs that Judy had highlighted, the Facebook pages as well. So, really expanding our educational reach and programming to the public proactively.
Okay, great. Any other questions before we close out?
I think Leo might have had a question. I don't know if that was a direct message that you received.
Oh,
I think he was trying to.
His was accidental.
It was an accident.
Okay.
Yeah, I think he said accidental. That's okay.
Oh, no, that's fine.
I've been struggling a little bit with the two screen syndrome here today.
Leo is just stretching.
Yes.
So,
Okay. Well, Judy, Sabrina, Polly, thanks again for your time. Glad we could set this up.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you. We
Yep,
really
thank
appreciate
you.
the opportunity. And if, again, anybody ever wants any more information or another presentation to a different group or whatever, we're available. And if you live in Ridge, you can sign up for wildfire prevention home assessment. Contact Sabrina.
It's a free service.
And we're happy to post that information on our website as well. So I'll reach out.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Have a good day,
Calling in.
everyone.
Have a good day.